Limboshire. The First Fall of Limboshire. Chapter 2. The young home carer was now with the older mother. They were sat then at the table together, with the broken plates that were now on the kitchen table between them. Yes, it was a one-off and an antique, but we'll have to discuss the cost tomorrow. Discuss it with the sons. I can't hide it from them. They knew about the special plates. They knew what their worth was. You know, I'm not expecting you to pay the whole cost of them. They were antiques, but you'd have to replace them with something special, you know. Discuss it with the sons tomorrow, please. We'll all discuss it then, said the older woman, because she was tired. The motherly figure felt quite sympathetic, hearing that it was an accident, but still insisted that the plates would have to be replaced somehow. Just clean up all the mess now, just get it all cleaned up and then go home. It's okay. I'll manage myself. We'll do a damage assessment tomorrow with my son when he visits. You know, I can't hide it from him, she'd said after the appeal. You know, he's bound to notice his father's special plate that's gone missing. You know, I'm just going to have to tell them when they visit. I'm sure an arrangement can be come to. You know, you could pay it back in small amounts or something. Some kind of arrangement can be found. Don't worry about that. You know, I'm sure he'll find a way. You could work it off in just doing small jobs or something. You know, I don't think he'd expect you to pay for the whole of it. Anyway, we'll come to some arrangement. Just leave it till tomorrow and we'll decide, said the mother now, trying to implore the younger woman not to get upset at the apparent cost that it could all be. You can be sure I'll be speaking to my son about it. I've got to, insisted the older woman. She went on now, getting up and shuffling back to the door slowly, retreating back now to her bedroom. Can I at least help you go to bed, though? I mean, do you need anything else for the evening? Offered the younger woman, still sat at the table, looking over to her. The older woman, though, rejected her advances. Just clean up everything, really, and then leave. It's okay. I'll manage, said the older woman, a little flustered and tired now, but calmer than she was earlier on. Tomorrow, when the sons visit, we'll discuss recompensing it. You know, we'll discuss what's fair to do. Okay, said the older woman. I know it was an accident, but they were the father's special plates. They were my late husband's plates too. He didn't have much in the world, and those plates were special, but I know it was an accident, she said once more. We'll come to some arrangement. It's okay, said the old woman once more, nodding, as if that was the end of the matter now, and preparing to go as she shuffled backwards and closed the door slightly on her. She doubted that it would be the end of it, talking civilized though. She wasn't sure if there would be an argument. Hope not tomorrow. Then slowly closing the kitchen door, slamming it then shut in the younger woman's face, although she was some distance from her, then shuffling back along the hallway, back to the stair chair, where she clambered back in, slowly going back up towards the upper hallway that led back to her own little bedroom, her own sanctuary. The younger woman, the home carer, the daughter figure, then did as isn't instructed. She then swept up all the broken smaller pieces that she'd missed earlier on, mopping up the last of the water, drying it all out, and making sure that all of the other kitchen utensils were put away in their proper places, and inspecting the other plates to make sure none of them were also broken. And they weren't. Only a couple had broken in the fall, thankfully, although those ones, terribly, were older antique, prized ones of the families, the special father's ones, the passed-on father's ones too. How awful, she thought. She felt terrible, but it was a genuine accident too. She hoped the sons would take it okay when the news was broken to them. Still, it was only a reminder of the father, and not their father or anything. That's what the mother herself had said. Still, she felt terrible for doing it, even though it was a real accident. She put all the broken pieces away, sweeping it up thoroughly, as if somehow that could remove the whole incident, putting them away in the black bags that she tied up and took out to the dustbins outside the house. She dried up then all the floors also, before taking out the rubbish with her as she left, locking the house up safely as she did, then leaving to the bin stores itself to have a little clean up there, as it often got dirty too, cleaning up with the outside broom. It was an outside little hut in one corner of the garden, where all the different sized dustbins and all the different boxes and bags for the recycling were all stocked and stored. There clattered and clammed the broken ceramic pieces as they were put into the larger bag. She heard them chinking against each other and sighing, feeling tired and frustrated, knowing now there would potentially be an additional cost to pay off, more additional work to do, realizing she would have much more work to pay off, more damages that she'd accrued and accumulated with this clumsy incident, since it was now in her part, her clumsiness at rushing through the task that had caused it, when she really felt she really had needed to be working much less. Just then she looked up at the sky, saw the moon glowing in its luminous glow, reflecting the sun's light from afar, its rounded shape like that of the unbroken plate before, reminding her of that. She decided then to take a moment to take a few of the larger pieces out of the black bag for some reason. She crouched down low, untied a few of the black bags, rummaging through where she could see. She picked up a few of the broken pieces, those that still fitted together, and that didn't have too many of the missing smaller fragments, that still looked like they had most of the original picture, that was more visible, discernible. Yeah, well, perhaps a few of those could be glued back together, with a few additional kind of things put in them. She didn't know what they would be. Perhaps she could fix up a few of those. And she put a few of the larger broken pieces into her own bag to take home with her. The rest that had crumbled into many more smaller fragments that she couldn't really envisage managing to fix at all, really. Just a few of the larger ones. She figured that maybe she could find a way to stick together one of the plates at least from some of the broken fragments, even if she couldn't do all of the other ones. There were a half a dozen that were broken in some ways, but only 2 that were completely shattered though. Perhaps she could rearrange a couple out of that. After all, surely that was better than none at all. Perhaps that could be some reminder, and then she could get some other kind of replacements too, that maybe looked or had an interesting style, something else that could remind them of their father. She then made her way slowly, wearily home, dreading the confrontation with the sons and the family tomorrow, hoping it wouldn't go too wrong with the woman's sons. One of them was an outspoken person, almost as outspoken as his mother, really critical, watchful, exacting, always inspecting her care and the different duties, following round to make sure that her hygiene was a reasonable standard, reading through the medical reports thoroughly, questioning her often, regularly enough, questioning the mother and other visitors on how the encounters were going, inspecting her work and all the reports that she made so regularly and thoroughly, and questioning her on it too. He seemed to view himself as some kind of caretaker or the guardian of his own mother's home, and of his mother too. With him, she had to be really formal, concisive, and also just really straight to the point. Yet with the younger brother, who visited sometimes also, he was much more carefree, laid back, and more casual as well. He would just turn up randomly, occasionally at the house, staying over in the lounge where he'd rough sleep there, staying for a few days sometimes. He also was a little clumsy sometimes too. He would talk to her sometimes. Yeah, he was like a distant friend, like an acquaintance now, a passing acquaintance, just chatting with her briefly, and then sometimes ignoring her when he was busy scrolling, texting, or just chatting on the phone, or engaged chatting with his mother sometimes. Busy, doing something. He'd chat to her occasionally, not at great length though. The 2 brothers had their own house that they lived in, quite separate from the mother, in a separate part of limboshire, in a completely different place. But then when they argued together, the young one would often venture out and then stay at his mother's house for a longer time. Like a ping pong, he went between his mother's house and the older brother's house. When he argued with the older brother, he went back to the mother's. When he argued and it became too much with the mother, he went back to the older brother's house, yo-yoing between the 2 of them for some years. The next day, as she arrived at the older woman's home for her caring duties again, a freshly picked bouquet of flowers in hand, carefully picked from her own overgrown garden that she hadn't really tended to in the last year or 2. She had then rehearsed her apologetic platitudes many times, yet she knew it wouldn't really suffice greatly. It wouldn't replace those broken reminding plates. She then clanged the garden gate shut sharply, and the bells on it jangled too, announcing that she had arrived, or some visitor had, as they always did, announcing the arrival of visitors to the house, clambering in their ringing. She was then on the doorstep, tapping the door numbers, typing out the number code on the box besides the actual wall of the house. They gave her this as the key, where the key was stored for those that had the right number connection. But before she could then get into the door lock, the door itself had then actually opened, surprising her. The older brother was stood there, looking stern and foreboding. "I'm really sorry," she began. "It really was an accident," began the home carer, with a solemn face. She's been up half the night, delirious in tears, rereading his old letters. Thought she'd gotten over all that years ago. My gosh," said the older son, now staring at her solemnly, too. "All that hard work and therapy. Something seems to have triggered the relapse. I don't know. I've had to call in the doctor for sedative. And that'll cost me too," began the older son now, shaking his head wearily. "I really am sorry about what happened. It was an accident," said the home carer once more. But he still shook his head solemnly. "Follow me. Come on to the kitchen," he said, now turning away from her, leaving her stood at the door, turning away and running down the hallway towards the kitchen door that he charged through. "We'll discuss the matter inside," he called out down the hallway to her, as she followed in along the hallway, closing the door behind her, the door to the outside world, now shuffling along towards the door for the family talk. With the key back in the safe, she did as she was requested, entering now into the kitchen, where she noticed that the two chairs had been arranged around one side of the table, on which was now a computer. A computer was stood on the table, with then a picture of some of the antique plates, those plates that had been broken last evening. The older son then gestured her over to one of the chairs stood on the table beside the computer screen, with the pictures of the antique plates on its screen projecting out. He then sat on the other chair beside her, then turning towards the screen's pictures, looking and scrolling through the different text and the pictures of those antique plates. After much research, I was finally able to track down a set of the dinner plates produced by a same company. Unfortunately, the firm went out of business a long time ago, years ago. So that particular range, the ones my parents bought, my father bought it, that went out of stock decades ago. It's out of stock a long time. There's a limited amount that are still on sale though, but it's hard to get them because there's so few of them in circulation now. That's pushed the price up a little bit, said the older son, grimacing a little, as he turned now, after reading the blurb, to look back at the home carer, turning to look at her eyebrows as they raised uncertainly. Her jaw dropped a little, gaping at him. "Well, maybe if we just search, we'll find cheaper ones, or something else that's similar to it. There's no need to go for the first price if you need to get a replacement," she began suddenly. "No," he said. "They're practically antiques, though. I mean, all the prices are going to be high because there is such a limited number of them, of that range. There were only a limited number that were made, and they've been out of stock so long. So the cost will always be very high, however long the search goes on," said the older son now, with his arms folded, serious now, with a stern face, looking to her unyielding. The younger woman then sighed, looking away, struggling, searching for answers. "Oh, well, if it has to be paid, it does. I don't know, you just have to bill me, and I'll pay it off gradually. I'll have to pay it in smaller instalments, if that's what I've got to do. I mean, I did break them, and it was my fault, and I'm sorry, and I was rushing through doing it. You know, I should never have had such puddles of water. I would never have slipped otherwise, and I'm sorry for that. But if I can pay in instalments or something, yes, I accept I'm indebted to you," she'd said after the elder son's long speech about it, reminding her that she didn't have to rush through that work and never had done before. The floor had never been completely soaked and wet, and if it hadn't been so soaked, she never would have slipped. nor if she hadn't been rushing so much either. Yes, she was guilty, she accepted, nodding solemnly after his long talk, his long appraisal of her performance. She agreed she had to pay it back and appealed to him. Could she pay it back in instalments, gradually over a long time? He'd agreed, nodding solemnly, that he would try to find a way to pay it back in more manageable amounts, in more manageable work. He looked over to the kitchen dresser, where the other plates that had survived the fall still stood, and where the other broken ones now had an empty place in their shelving places. So now you admit full responsibility. Well, I'm glad at least for that. And yes, we will find a manageable way of paying it back in smaller instalments, if it needs to be that, over a longer period of time. Of course. Of course. But of course, you know, they've got to be replaced. You can't just go around doing things like that to anyone, said the older son, and she nodded along too with him in agreement, not wanting to provoke any kind of argument with him. After all, there's nothing wrong with the dresser itself. The plate stand itself was fine. You barged into it, and you were the cause of the accident, began the elder son once more. Yes, I know, and I'm sorry for that. I was in a hurry to get home. I caused the large waterfall. I spilt all that water. I slipped on it because I was rushing. I accepted all that. The plaintiff had finally admitting her full responsibility in causing her own accident, in breaking the antique plates themselves. And now she admitted liability in having to pay back and replace those new antique plates. His eyebrows then had raised again. Well, there shouldn't be any puddles of water on the floor, and you shouldn't be rushing through duties anyway. What if Mother had come in and slipped herself and had a fracture or done something herself? You could be paying for a hip replacement or something worse. A physiotherapy. She could have slipped on that or anything, began suddenly the older son. But the younger woman then retaliated, and then provoked, shouted out herself, No, if I noticed she came in the room, I would have warned her of it. I would have mopped it up long before. I mopped it up before anyway. If ever it was splashed over the floor, I always mopped it before I'd finished. Always, said the younger woman now, in her defence. Oh, so you are doing this regularly. It's not just a one-off thing. You're just flooding the kitchen floor on a regular basis. Is that what you do then, is it? Just soak everything. No wonder there's damp all over the place. It's a surprise that she doesn't come in here. What if she came in here when you were outside having a cigarette or something, or outside the garden hanging up the washing? She didn't know and slipped over or something. Now began the older son, provoked himself into anger, not knowing that the floor was being flooded. No, it's not a regular thing. Sometimes I just splash a little at the sink. You know, sometimes there's a lot of washing to get done. Yes, a little puddle happens sometimes, of course. But I always wash up and dry up everything thoroughly. Besides, your mum's always upstairs. She never comes down, or rarely. She never will come into the kitchen when I'm washing up. And there's no visitors anyway. If there's a little puddle by the sink, my gosh, it's not that bad. I've never slipped up in it anyway. There was a lot more washing up to do yesterday. I had all the dinner from the weekend left behind. When the visitors came here and I wasn't able to visit yesterday, all the washing up accumulated. There was hours to be done. And some of those pots and pans were a lot harder to scrub. I had to leave them in to soak. I had 5 times as much more than I was doing normally. Of course there was more splashback. It wasn't normally that bad. It never is. Now began the accused once more defending herself. And if there was ever a small puddle in the past, it was always mopped up long before your mum or anyone else came in the room. Your mum never visits anyway. She's never down here. I always go up there to see her, said now the defendant once more. And the older son seemed to nod along to this and be reassured by her answers to some extent, saying that he felt that her answers seemed at least genuine. And yes, on the occasional inspections that he'd come round, he'd only ever noticed a small puddle at the kitchen sink area, never flooding the whole kitchen, and not the kitchen dresser area, not where the plates were stacked and stored. No, he'd never seen that before. So he was convinced by her genuine sounding answer, at least, nodding along assured by this. Oh well, I'm just going to have to pay for those plates. I've accepted that enough. It's just going to take a long time to do it. I am in a really hard position at the moment, began the younger woman then. No, I know that. I know, said the older son. I know that, but we've got to come to a decision. We'll do it gradually over time, of course. We need a calm, patient carer for Mum. We just don't need someone rushing who's erratic. We don't need a kid racer, basically, said the older son now. It's only fortunate no serious damage was done on this occasion. Don't worry about the plate. If it's paid off over months, years, it doesn't matter. I know you've been with Mum a long time, and it's okay. So I'll deal with the plate. Pay it off in however small amounts you need to, however long it takes. It doesn't matter how long it is, said the older son now. She always thought of him as the older son because he always spoke for and about the mother. That's all they ever talked about, really, around him. Even though she did look at him as a big brother sometimes. He didn't really act brotherly to her, though. No, only to his other brother. And now, as for how often to pay it back, we'll decide that as we go along. You tell me how often enabled you are able to work and what you're able to do. We'll find things to do and ways that you can pay it off gradually, as and when, okay? Said the older brother-son figure. I will order the cheapest set that I can find, something that is similar to it, if not identical, okay? And I will try to keep the costs down, said the older man to her, trying to reassure her of this. But she didn't know him well enough to know if he would do that or not. Then he paused, as if thinking over something, and she saw something sinister, perhaps, or something that she didn't know in his eyes, as if he was looking her over, studying her, measuring her up, considering her for some potential job or some work she could do to pay off these new debts, perhaps. His eyes seeming to scan her, linger on her for a few seconds longer than she cared for. And she wondered what it was. You can visit me at my home, and we'll arrange to come to some arrangement there, okay? Visit me at the house with my brother. We'll come to some arrangement. We'll discuss it there. We'll find something you can do, something you're able to. It's all right, and it won't take too much time. But he left it unsaid, unspoken, quite what the nature of that work was, what that would be, but his eyes had lingered on her body for just too long for her liking. She just didn't know what he was measuring her up for. She was about to protest or ask something, when he spoke again, arising now from the chair at the table. After all, I know you're in a difficult position. I know things are going hard for you, but you're still able to do some work, and we'll find something that adapts around your needs. And crumbs won't feed us. You can't just cut down a garden and then merely give us a bunch of flowers in return. When you break something, that has consequences. And Mum didn't have that much left to remind her of father. I think she clung on to that as a keepsake, as something that... he shrugged and sighed wearily, turning away, as if the sight of her was too much now, but then was staring at the actual plate rack of where all the other unbroken plates were, and seeing the missing places on the actual plate rack itself of where the broken plates should have been. Then, another reminder, he turned away from that too, looking back to her, with a stern face still, as if uncertain himself what to say or what to do about it. He began then gradually walking away to the door, unspoken, taking his computer then, folding up the laptop under one arm, taking it away with him, to bid for one of the antique plates that he'd found, perhaps. She felt then in a daze, unsure quite what to ask him about this arrangement that he meant to come to terms with, when he then turned at the kitchen door abruptly, speaking almost like a father to a child. Now, don't get me wrong, I know it was a genuine accident, but it was really of sentimental importance to Mum. Very important. It's just upsetting for her, that's all, really. Just try and be more careful about anything else, please. It was only one of the few things left that she had of Dad, that's all. She's gradually losing her mind anyway. I think she relied on a lot of her reminders, so they were more precious, that's all. It's not a personal thing. I don't think she's getting upset or angry at you. She just took it to heart because she relies on those things so much to remind her of him, said the younger son now, imploringly to the home carer, still sat there flummoxed at the kitchen table, unsure what to think. But she nodded along. Yes, and she saw that he was concerned for the mother too. I understand, but I think she'll be okay. She's got a lot of other things. She's got you and your brother to remind her, and me too, and others, other friends of your father's also, and his books. There's a lot of other things, and her memories, those that she still does have, began the home carer. Yeah, sure, snapped the home carer, snapped the oldest son. Yes, she does have that as well, he admitted. I will expect you tomorrow evening, though. We'll have a nice dinner with my brother as well, and we'll just have a chat about it too. As soon as you've done the chores here, just come over to my house. We'll have a chat about it. Find something that you're able to do. He finally had said, taking her silence as an acceptance of this. See you tomorrow night then, he finally said. And with that, he then turned and marched out the house then, out of the front door, leaving her then alone with her thoughts, and then with the chores of the day to do. Before she had much time to dwell on it all, the old woman was then calling down to her, with her large croaky voice calling out. So quietly she then began making the morning tea, preparing the morning medication for the day. Fortunately, she had found enough energy to do the daily visit. She had worked hard the night before, in preparation, having only to wrap up and warm up the food itself, and then to cook it thoroughly through. By the time she'd reached the son's home, she felt tired, but not quite yet exhausted. Enough energy for the usual routine at home. Unwinding, washing, eating supper, washing up, and then she didn't bother with the drying and putting away of her own washing up things. And then fitting in a chapter or two before changing in nighttime clothes. Sometimes she would miss the chapter altogether and just have a bath instead. Or write a letter to an old friend, an old acquaintance. She was behind on those letter writings. She was at least 3 letters behind now. She tried to send ones that appeared friendlyish, always reply a letter to a friendly letter, but to not invite too many more replies, because she always had to reply to other letters that she received. If they were friendly letters, she felt obliged to reply to all of them. That only led to her having to write many more replies, though. Some conversations were only yearly responses, though. Many more were monthly ones or more regular. Some others were just quarterly, and some were quite randomly or once in a blue moon. Yet there were few, irrationally in some cases, but wonderfully in other cases, that had developed into quite regular responses. Weekly letter writing that had developed into pen pal relationships. One pen pal had grown anxious if she didn't receive her weekly correspondence, the weekly letters. She took great care over the many words and the phrases and the different stories that she wrote to this new pen pal friend, where time and mental abilities permitted her to write those letters. But on a longer night, feeling giddy from the day's business, tired from mental and physical work, she didn't always feel in the mood or quite able to write a caring, focused letter. Writing letters for the many new pen pal acquaintances that she'd acquired over the years, when she hadn't been able to go out as much regularly to visit physical friends. The front garden was tidy, with regimented rows of flowers all orderly lining the paths that ran around the sculptures of iron cast statues that appeared to be rusting, covered in lichen too, with yellow and green lichen all over it. They were mythological, fantastical creatures, creations of the artists, local village artists that had sold the mechanical sculptures to her at one of the many great fairs. She thought them really curious, one-off uniques. But the whole arrangement seemed really obscure and a little eerie, strange at the late hour, at a dusky moonlight hour, when you approached and saw all of the shadows, and weren't sure what those mechanical statues were when they were shadowed amongst all the different plants and bushes and trees that they stood within, and you couldn't be sure what their weird shadowy movements were, not at a dusky late hour. The figures then appeared to be human-like creatures themselves for a brief second, to the unknown person passing by, perhaps. She had thought They were the son's gardeners on one occasion, lurking like soldiers within the bushes themselves. But as her eyes had adjusted during those first visits to the son's house, during the longer wait when she was stood outside the door, seeing the shadowy movements repeat themselves again and again, then she saw they were the motionless statues just doing their few monotonous mechanical movements that they did repeatedly ad nauseam again and again. Waiting a long time at the door, for several minutes, she saw them repeat their movements once more monotonously. She had had the time to study such things, to survey them, and then adjusted, glimpsing the stars and staring up beyond them, staring at the distant houses and the other gardens beyond them too. Because she'd seen the mechanical statues moving, she knew what those were from her many visits before, so she didn't have any alluring interest in looking at them anymore. Only a few brief minutes, felt much longer sometimes, stood out in this awful cold. She rang a third time, finally. The bell was ringing through the house. The echo could be heard from the outside. Then, finally, after several minutes, she was about to ring for a fourth time, but the door suddenly swung open, and she had been sweating a little. Apart from the large walk there, the steep slope she'd had to clamber up, and also feeling a little anxious now as well, a little nervous, visiting them house in such a formal way. But then she was taken aback to see him, the younger brother, and not the elder. She had been expecting to see the older brother, whom she had made the arrangement with. "I was due to meet your older brother," said the young woman, stood at the door, to the young man. "I arranged to meet him earlier at your mum's house, for dinner this evening," she was saying. "Oh, he's not back yet, still at work. He's out doing his visits still. Often gets delayed though. You could wait inside, but I've nowhere knowing when he'll be back. You could always text him or something," suggested the young brother, stood at the door with a smile, happy then to see the young woman, the sister figure, that cared for his mother. She thought then for a brief moment. "Well, we'll have this arrangement. We had it yesterday to meet, so yes, I could meet inside because it's so cold out here," she then said. "I'd be better off waiting, if you don't mind," she'd said. "No, of course not," the younger brother had said, stepping aside now for her to enter, leaving a gap, stepping aside and gesturing her to pass through into the doorway. "Is there any way that you could actually telephone or contact him, just to let him know I'm here?" she'd asked. "We could try and text him. He might not respond though. He won't necessarily answer if he's in a meeting, but I could text him, yes." "Yes, I'll try and do that. Got told off for calling him by one of his managers, so no, I can't really get through to him a lot of the time, but I'll send a text message," said the younger son, ushering her through to a lounge area now, to a large seating area. "If he's between visits or on the way home, then yeah, he'll probably answer. But if he's not, if he's in a meeting, then he probably can't and won't. But we'll text anyway," said the younger son now. "We should get an answer if he's between visits, or else I'll just leave him a message on the machine." The younger brother had said this now, loitering now in the lounge area, besides where she was sat on a large chair, with a telephone table stood beside them. It was nearby the lounge area, a large shaded lounge that people relaxed on to make telephone calls. "No, I'm sorry, there's still no answer from him," said the younger brother, after some time, after he's left to make a call, coming into the lounge area to rejoin the young woman, the visitor, the home carer for his mother, where he lingered over her, as if unsure where to place himself, or even how to stand, with his arms dangling awkwardly by his side. "Well, how late does he normally get back?" asked the home carer. The young man had shrugged. "It varies, different times," he said unhelpfully. She nodded along, looking around the room, now surveying its tidiness, its neatness, and enjoying some of the colourful, vivid pictures that there were hung up on the walls. "I suppose you can't plan for the traffic. Maybe he's stuck in traffic or something," The young visitor shrugged. No, his visits just send him all over the place. It could be a distant visit, you know. Sometimes his clients live a long way away, said the young brother. What exactly is your brother doing, though, on the visits? The young visitor asked him, genuinely interested. She couldn't imagine him as a home carer. With his brusque, abrupt manner, he wasn't out visiting, caring for people. Surely, she reasoned. Oh, he helps people, gives them advice, says the younger brother now. Helps them with what? Inquired the visiting sister, looking up to him, a little confused, flummoxed. The young man shrugged. I don't know. All sorts of things. He gives out legal advice. He says he's not really allowed to talk about the kind of work, client confidentiality, you know. Well, what kind of clients? You must know the kind of work he's in, she repeated. Well, it's something to do with the law, I said, but I don't know specifics. You don't know what kind of law your brother's into? Then asked the home carer, now confused by this. Well, it's family law, but there's lots of different kinds of law that he deals with. Loads of different, too many to mention, really, all sorts. Shrugged the younger brother. Oh, I see, said the younger visiting sister, feeling perhaps it best not to pry any further if it was something that the brother couldn't talk about openly to her. He remained loitering around, standing around casually, and not sure how to place himself, wondering if he should offer a drink or not. Why don't you just sit down, keep me company until he gets here? She suggested then. She glanced at the space on the sofa next to her, and he then obliged, sitting next to her, but looking aside, staring out to space, and sat there awkwardly, as if crunched up in a small space, and with his legs crossed over, his arms folded. So what is it you do then, while your brother's out on his legal visits? She then asked pointedly, turning to stare at him, surveying him, looking him up and down. Well, I help him at the house. I help looking after the house. Just do a bit of cleaning, gardening, just washing, that sort of thing. Sometimes he has me doing other jobs for him, washing clothes, ironing. I do write letters sometimes. And I do shopping, just stuff like that, really, began the younger brother. Oh, I see, interrupted the woman. He's got you well trained then, like his little housewife, secretary too, joked the younger visitor. And he strained a smile at this, the younger brother, unsure if this was perhaps a compliment or some kind of criticism of him. I hope he's not taking advantage of you, said the young visitor. But the younger man shook his head. No, he doesn't overload me or anything. Just us, just helping him out around the house, you know. You're indebted to him? Asked the younger woman, the visitor finally, after a while, after an awkward silence. And then he, the younger brother, was silent for a moment too, frowning as if in doubt. No, well, we look after each other. We care for each other. We support each other, really. Good, said the younger woman, the visitor finally. I should hope so, and that's what family's for, right? She finally said. Sometimes, said the younger brother, after a long pause. When we're not arguing, he finally said. And the younger woman had laughed. Yeah, I used to argue with my brothers all the time. You know, we sometimes get on. That's the way it is in a house when you're living together for so long. Yeah, you're going to rub each other up the wrong time. Yes, you're going to get frustrated. But as long as you care for each other, that's the important thing. Now I almost miss their bad habits. I haven't seen them in so long, though, said the younger woman to him. You don't see them any more, then? Asked the younger brother, now turning to look at her more sincerely, having been staring away from her, meeting her eyes finally, but just briefly, before turning away, a little embarrassed. Unfolding his arms, though, leaning and turning a little towards her. No, not so often. We weren't really that close. We just meet up very occasionally, hardly ever. I chat to a couple on the telephone. We all lost contact a long time ago. Lead busy lives, people do now. Move away so often. A lot of them moved on years ago, to be honest, she was now saying. But then, as she was scanning the room, the large lounge they were in, she then noticed something, staring at it. You have everything so tidy, so meticulous, she remarked. Has the look of a mausoleum, she finally has said. He smiled awkwardly. Well, it helps in finding things. Everything must have its place, said the younger brother with a smile. So what else do you do? I mean, apart from helping keep this place together, helping it function, and helping your older brother, she finally asked. The younger man had shrugged. Well, I visit Mum sometimes. You know that. She laughed. Well, I do know that. I've seen you there a lot, of course. I'm always seeing you in passing, though, so we never really get to talk too long, do we, really? No, I'm sorry if I get in your way ever. I know you're always busy when you're there at Mum's, said the younger son, a little defensively. No, you're not in the way. You never were, said the young home carer, waving her hand dismissively. If anything, you're a welcome distraction. Yeah, it's nice having someone else to chat to sometimes. I know we haven't talked that much. Not that she's really demanding, but she does go on a lot, your mum. Gosh, she can talk so much. She goes off on tangents. She's fascinating in her stories, but she does go on a lot, you know. It's just that sometimes the chores as well, it does get a bit too much. Gets a lot repetitive, you know. The younger home carer then gone on to say. Yes, the younger brother had said, nodding along. Sometimes, why do you think none of us are living with her? She goes on a lot, to be honest. But yeah, it must get a bit too much for you. I'm sorry we haven't talked more, really. Don't you find though that chores are always different? I mean, I'm always doing the same chores all the time, but every day it's different as well. You know, uh, you never cross the same river twice. You're always doing this, even if it's the same thing you're repeating 1,000 times, but you're always doing it in a little different way. It's always different. Not really, no, said the home carer after thinking of it. It seems the same to me. Just seems monotonous, repetitive. All right, you're doing it in a slightly different way, but it's the same thing. Things are in a constant state of change, though. Each moment is unique from whatever your mood is on other people's and whatever the physical situation, the weather, everything. So, no, every single chore is a kind of meditation. It is unique. And however many times you've done it, like 100 times, 1,000 times, it's still the first time of doing it because it's still a unique time. It's your first time of doing it that day or in that year, began the younger brother, though she didn't seem really that convinced by his reasoning. I don't know what you're talking about, she said. A chore is a drag and an awful thing, and a nuisance and an annoyance and frustration to everyone. Yes, you enjoy riding a car, but that depends who's driving and why. But you don't enjoy doing it after the 1,000th drive. Things just do get frustrating and annoying. But the less you do it, the more you appreciate and enjoy things. You know, a walk in the park can be beautiful if you don't do it that often. If it's in a beautiful place, then it's a different thing than if you're having to walk through a dirty, grimy place every day for 1,000 years. Then it wouldn't be beautiful. It would still be horrible. You know, there's meditation, but then there's washing 1,000 plates, mopping 100 floors. They're necessary chores. Yes, they're necessary, but it doesn't stop them being chores, and it doesn't make them fun or enjoyable or even learning. Not if you're repeating the same thing, more or less, went on the home carer, feeling that the younger man was trying to somehow convince her of something. I heard about the breaking plates, yes, said the younger man finally. I'm sorry to hear about that, he said as if it was a broken person. Oh, he told you about that, did he? Your brother? She finally asked. Yeah, well, we're brothers, we've got no secrets, he replied. So how do you know then? I mean, why did he tell you? She asked. And he shrugged. I don't know. I guess he felt like it was something worthwhile saying. I mean, it was father's plate, but I don't think it's that important anyway. The drop plate, it was just an accident. I was really tired, it was really late. And then the younger brother cut in. A lapse in concentration. Perhaps you were just daydreaming, or you didn't really care. You lost focus, or meditation, or something, said the younger man, a little sternly. No, it's because the floor was wet and I slipped. I wasn't angry, I wasn't joyful or joyriding, or whatever you think. I wasn't even having fun. I was in a lot of pain. It was late in the day. I was feeling exhausted. And it was just an accident, she began once more, irritated now at his stern line of questioning. Oh, I'm sorry. I know it's not a regular thing you do or anything, and it's probably bound to happen occasionally. But you know what? If you only break 1 in 1,000 plates, I suppose that's a high success rate, and it doesn't happen that often. It's just that it was an antique and a special plate. It was our father's plate, the younger son had said now. Yes, and I'm sorry for that. No one ever remembers 999 clean, dry, and well stacked plates, do they? But they remember the one broken plate, all right. Like all the kind words that get overlooked, and everyone just remembers one cheap insult in an angry moment. Why is that? Said the young home carer, now annoyed herself. And the younger man had looked at that and thought, well, it all depends on how bad that insult was, if it was a real personal thing. But no, that all depends, of course, on whether the insult is fair or not as well, really. He then sent. A fair insult? Asked the home carer, turning to him closely. Oh, what's the kind of thing of a fair insult? There's no such thing as a fair insult, surely, she reasoned to him. I mean, if the hat fits, if it's a criticism that's actually accurate, characteristic of that person. Otherwise, it can't be that insulting. Criticism that's inaccurate, impersonal, it's just bland, it's just, that's just random. And so it's different. It's not the same thing as having something that's accurate, personal, something that's insensitive to that particular person. If I call an athlete lazy, for example, or an academic person idiotic, when actually they're not, or if I just called a monk some sex monster, or I called a homeless man greedy, or I called a businessman a complete failure with no drive in his life, then that's no kind of insult at all, because it doesn't actually match up to the person's true characters, and that person will know that about themselves, so it isn't really an insult that you take to heart. Yet what of the athlete who vainly seeks fame, or the academic master who considered his intellect to be superior to many others, or the business manager who succeeded materially rather than emotionally or morally? Progress, is measured in different ways. So yeah, I think that there are insults that are fair and those that are wrong, and those that are not characteristic and not personal and not particular to that person, explained the younger man now. The younger home carer had nodded along to them. Yeah, I get what you're saying. Material progression is related to moral progression and spiritual progression too. There's a whole lot of different things, aren't there? She said, shrugging. And the monk, who on discovering his angelic nature has a demonic flip side, would rather repress his emotions than confronting his own reality. Then the young man had gone on to say, oh, what a load of stereotypes. You've reduced us just to cheap stereotypes. You're talking as if we can be categorized, as if we have these different kind of personalities. Many relationships make a character. How we relate to other characters, to actors, to audiences, to people watching, to directors, even how we relate to ourselves. Like an athlete could even be a monk, and a homeless person, and a business person, and a retired academic. Like they could all just be one person at different chapters in their life. You can't reduce someone to some cheap caricature of a person, can you? Now, said the younger woman, you're missing the point. Different people have different virtues and different flaws. Of course I accept that. But flattering a person who doesn't do the things that you praise them for, idolizing them for that, is like exaggerating a flaw that they didn't really have anyway. Like genuine praise or compliments, on the other hand, is like actually giving genuine criticism too. It goes to the heart, because it can affect a person, because they know their own heart is actually being criticized or being appreciated. And what kind of criticism would you give me then? The home comforter had finally asked, after hearing about his reasoned explanation. Oh, I don't know you well enough. We're not really close enough to know each other that well, shrugged the young man, now not sure, looking away for him again. In any case, positive criticism also comes with the negative too, so it's a double-edged sword with everyone, with anything, said the young man too. You mean you don't want to be critical, or you don't feel that you're able to with me? She asked, trying to clarify. Well, both. We don't know each other that well, do we? He replied. The young home comforter had sighed then. Well, we've gotten to know each other a little over the years, wouldn't you say? Yes, he agreed, nodding along. A little, in passing, but not greatly. They had talked for a while, for just shy of an hour, about their different diets, the different food that they liked to have, and different cleaning tips that they shared too. Long ago tales of adventures that they talked about their childhoods very briefly. You and your brothers, you all owe each other a lot, she then asked him. No, she replied, none of us owe each other at all. We're all even with each other now, long ago. Being even, in their world, in limboshire, means that the score is finally settled. A broken plate is replaced or mended. A compliment given to one that had been insulted. A compliment given to one that had been insulted. This was always more favoured than trading insults, or breaking the plate of the plate breakers. Managing to give back the love to those that had loved you was considered breaking even, paying the debts to others, in those that lived in limbo. And yet you all must still owe your parents and be indebted to them, then asked the young home comforter. Yes and no. I mean, it does vary a lot, really. Our parents passed away some years ago, the young home comforter had said. Oh, I'm sorry to hear that, the young man had said somberly. It's okay. And we had them up to a point for a while, when we were adolescents still. At least we knew them for some of the time. Well, father was away working a lot. When he was there, though, there was good and bad in it, really. She trailed off, staring away now. But you still owed them when they passed over. You never were even with them at that point. No, I still felt I owed them and was burdened to them. So I still had time. I still felt indebted to care for others that they would want me to care for. Then clarified the home comforter. Yes, there was just no time to care for them. It was unexpected that they passed on, really. We thought we'd have much longer with them. She's gone on now. So you'll remain indebted to them? Had asked the younger man. She felt his questionings were just persistent and wondered why. What were his motives in this? Oh, it's all complicated, she finally answered, waving his questions away now with an arm, unsure how much to tell him about her own past. No, my parents had owed lots of debts, and we'd accumulated many of them, and were also owed too, so since we owed our parents, and our parents owed many others, then we inherited their debts, as well as their investments too, both. You and your brothers inherited equal amounts? Then asked the younger man. She had then shrugged at this. I was younger and had much less. I had less parenting, so naturally I inherited less of the debts, and less of their investments as well, really. Then said the woman. Oh, so that's a shame. Less of the investments, but at least less of the burdens too, though, said the younger man, and she nodded along. Still, the share of each that I had was sufficient for me. I cared for strangers who cared for our parents, so that's how I repaid the parents. I had a connection with others that had a connection with them. That way they then had their own way of paying back, so it worked out that way. Sometimes it was anyway that it worked out. Not always, of course. You sometimes resented having to care for strangers, but the strangers that cared for your parents, I guess, asked the younger man now, persisting in his questioning. Oh, I wouldn't call them strangers, not because they knew my parents well, and got to know me well over the years too. Well, we got to know each other well. You get to know people really well, build relationships when you're caring for each other, when someone's very ill especially.